On behalf of the Sustainability Reporting Standard Board of ICAI, I, Jyoti Singh, extend a warm welcome to all of you to the 24th session of our webinar series, Demystifying Sustainability Catalyzing Growth. Today's session is centered around a critical theme, green credits and carbon markets in India. We are honored to have with us our esteemed speaker, CA Gauri Methi and our moderator for today, Shri Priyal Karaniji and CA Riddhi Bhumit Galaji. Let us now begin. I would like to invite CA Riddhi ji to kindly take the session forward.
Thank you, ma'am. Today's speaker, C. Gauri Methi. She's a chartered accountant and MBA with a master's in financial management from Lyric Business School. Has over 9 years of expertise in annual reporting, ESG advisory, and SEBI compliance. As a seasoned speaker, as a seasoned speaker and a co-researcher on corporate reporting practices, she's also an ICI empaneled technical reviewer and holds certifications in India's business responsibility and sustainability reporting and Bloomberg market concepts. Over to you, ma'am. Gauri, ma'am.
Thank you, Riddhi, for a warm introduction. And good evening, everyone who is present there to attend today's session. So first of all, before I begin today's session, I would like to thank the entire team of SRSB and chairman, including chairman and vice chairman, for continuously taking the initiatives to impart knowledge to the members at large. So there has been, so since we are today on the 24th series of this webinar, it's a great initiative by the entire coordination and everything by the team to ensure that the members are updated about what all is happening in and around sustainability. And also thanks for the opportunity. Today, I would like to deliberate on the most emerging segments, that is the carbon credit trading scheme, which came recently. Before we deliberate into this, I would request, since this is more of a scheme, I would say that is still in an evolution phase. So I would want all the audience to be interactive, and it's more of a knowledge enhancement webinar and not a one-sided conversation. So you all can feel free to put your Q&As in between, and we should try to make it more interactive. Now, moving on, before we move and discuss about India's carbon credit trading scheme, I would like to give a brief introduction of what all is happening in and around the world with respect to the sustainability. So, if we look at, we can also go to the next slide, please. So, if we look at the journey that the world is traveling towards the sustainability, let's go back to 2015 when the Paris Agreement took place. So in 2015, when 196 countries came together and signed their individual national determined contributions to combat the climate change and to take initiatives to ensure that the global temperature does not rise below, to hold the global temperature increase to below 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees. So that's where the journey began, or I would say that's where the sustainability journey was really it came into the limelight. So not that before 2015 there were no initiatives that were taken with respect to sustainability, but in 2015, when in the Paris Agreement 196 countries came together and they all signed and adopted those United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, that was the starting point of this sustainability journey. And India, so as we'll move to the next slide, I'll also discuss about what all contributions were determined by India in that sustainability journey. So now in 2015, when these member countries, they adopted UN SDGs and they took a target. So every individual country took their own targets. For instance, India took a target to be carbon neutral by 2017. So this is a broader climate action plan that the India has taken, right? Now, we also look at what all targets are taken. Can we move to the next slide, please? So now, these are the India's climate action commitments. All these commitments. So I'm just giving, we will just discuss here about India's climate action commitments. In a similar way, there are commitments which are taken by other member countries also. And that's how all the countries, 196 countries came together and signed their individual nationally determined contributions to, the idea is to move towards the global goal of attaining the combating climate change. So that's the global goal that we are talking about here. Now, also there is one interesting fact, like I'm not sure how many of the audience are aware about the BRSR reporting, but India also came with its own regulatory reporting frameworks, that is the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report. So this reporting ensures that the reporting, financial reporting, which was earlier the listed companies which only used to report about the financial statements and analysis, the financial reporting has been expanded to non-financial and reporting as well, and covers the sustainable initiatives of the companies. So BRSR reporting is currently extended to 1,000 listed companies by market capitalization. So if we talk about the Indian regulation, then currently, as per the Indian regulation, it is mandatory for top 1,000 listed companies by market capitalization to prepare business responsibility and sustainability report. Now, by mandating this report as well, the India is in a way encouraging companies to because they just can't report anything. So to report in their business responsibility and sustainability report, there are initiatives which are to be taken by the companies at the ground level also. So this is in a way a top-down approach which is being followed by all the I would say by all the nations. So if we talk about India, India took the is following the top-down approach and took a global goal, a national goal, and to implement that national goal, there are different initiatives which are taken with regards to, let's say, for instance, the sustainability reporting. Mandating the sustainability reporting is one such initiative. Then this extending of this sustainability reporting to the value chain partners is also in the discussions, I would say. So if, for instance, this sustainability reporting is extended to the value chain partners, then the ambit of the companies reporting on their sustainability reporting initiatives will expand from 1,000 to the value chain partners as well. Now, this is with regards to reporting. But then, in a similar way, there are targets also taken to combat the emissions, also to reduce the emissions as well. And that's where these carbon credit trading schemes and carbon credit mechanism comes into picture. So now let us just look at the goals that were taken, or the targets that were taken in the nationally determined contributions by India in the Paris Agreement in 2015. So if I read through these, and these goals are basically reviewed every 5 years. They are reviewed, and there are certain goals which are achieved. So there is an updation that happened with respect to those goals, and the goals, there is a margin for revision, I would say, in those goals. Now, if we look at these goals, so for instance, the goal is India's updated NEC promotes sustainable living based on conservation and moderation, and launch the LIFE movement, Lifestyle for Environment, as a climate change strategy. So this is one of the goals. Then the other is reduce emission intensity of GDP by 45% by 2030 compared to 2005 levels. So this goal was earlier to achieve. In the earlier mentioned NDCs, the goal was to reduce emission intensity of GDP by 33 to 35% by 2030. But when in a recent press release by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, it has been updated that this goal is already achieved. So now this goal has been updated from 33 to 35% bracket to 45% bracket to achieve energy intensity of GDP by 45% by 2030. So this has been revised. Similarly, there is another goal to achieve 50% cumulative installed electric capacity from non-fossil fuel sources by 2030. Again, this goal earlier mentioned in the NDC was 40%, which has again been updated to 50%. And in a recent press release by MOEFCC, it was declared that India has already achieved this goal, and that is the reason that it's updated, and that's why there is a continuous monitoring in every 5 years that is happening with regards to these NDCs. Then there is another goal of additional 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2 sink by 2013 through afforestation and reforestation. Now, this is in a way aligned to our climate action plan, or I would say the carbon credit scheme also, wherein India plans to create 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2 sink by 2030. So to create those sinks, this scheme came, and I would not say that this is the only reason for implementation or for getting this scheme into into place, but this is also in a way interlinked to the climate action plan. Then climate resilience through investments in agriculture, water, coast, Himalayas, disaster and health sectors, and enhance access to green climate fund, green tech, climate tech transfer, and R&D collaboration frameworks. So these are the goals that were taken by India as a country as a whole to achieve the goals that were mentioned, to align it with the global goal of combating climate change. Then now, if we move to the next slide, then we see that, can you move to next slide, please? So now we will see in the next slide that there are, these are the goals. Now, when we align, so we want to align that what are the reasons for the emergence of these carbon credits. So as I was mentioning before, that this is mainly to climate change mitigation is one of the main reasons, wherein it is the idea is to cap the overall emissions and reduce to encourage reductions where they are most cost effective. So the idea is to cap the overall emissions, and also not that the carbon credit is a very new concept. It is a concept which was earlier also in place. So the idea is that we encourage companies, people to reduce the carbon emissions so that India is ultimately able to achieve its national goal. Then apart from this, there is also compliance and regulations. Obviously, this comes from a Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement. This is in alignment with the international agreements. And the idea is to set those emission reduction targets in order. And there are different types of markets where these carbon credits are traded. There are compliance and regulated market and voluntary market. So where this is being regulated or there is a compliance mechanism, there that also needs to be followed in alignment with whatever the agreement is, the Kyoto Protocol or Paris Agreement, whichever is the base body. Then obviously to reduce cost associated with cutting emissions, make it economically and environmentally and socially benefits. These are some obvious benefits or reasons for emergence of carbon credits. Now let us just understand the very basic definition of what is a carbon credit. So we can move to next slide. So now let us just look at the very basic definition of a carbon credit. If we understand in a layman language, carbon credit is basically giving us it's a tradable permit which represents, so one carbon credit represents 1 ton of CO2 equivalent emissions which are reduced, removed, or avoided from the atmosphere, generated by projects that support climate goals. So the carbon credit is basically a credit which any company, I would say, gets when it reduces, or it's not just reducing, but it removed or avoided an emission. So 1 ton of CO2 emission, if any company has avoided, then it will get 1 carbon credit. there are different means of avoiding that emission. So there are different ways of avoiding, and that means will depend on what market are we operating in. So if we are operating in a compliance market, then it's different. If we are operating in a voluntary market, then it's different. But there are different means of achieving that credit. So basically, it can be through any additional projects, or it can be through product equivalent. So when we are able, in our manufacturing capabilities, I would say, we are able to achieve that reduction in emission. So that's when the credit we get, any company gets carbon credit or is eligible for a carbon credit when it is reducing or saving. I would not say only reducing, removing or avoiding 1 ton of CO2 equivalent emissions in the atmosphere. Whatever means that we will discuss later on, that what can be the means of it. So also it is to be noted that this is not a very new concept that came now. We all must have heard about renewable energy certificates and energy saving certificates. So they, if we look at the renewable energy certificates, then they were governed by the RPO, and there were regulations. It also operated, the RECs also operated in a regulated market where whenever a company, the listed companies or whosoever were the obligated entities, they were given renewable energy certificates for saving energy from, for like basis how much energy they are using from renewable sources. So based on that, if the target is to use X amount of energy from renewable sources, and if a company is able to reduce, like achieve Y or source Y amount of energy from renewable sources, and the difference between X and Y, like Y is less than X, then they are eligible for a credit and they get this renewable energy certificate. So again, this renewable energy certificate is also a tradable instrument, I would say. In a similar pattern, there are energy saving certificates. So energy saving certificate is also is the regulatory body behind energy saving certificate is Bureau of Energy Efficiency. Now, Bureau of Energy Efficiency has laid down 9 different industries, I would say, which high energy intensive industries, which if they reduce their energy or if they save energies in those specific 9 industries, if they save energies, then they are eligible or they get these energy saving certificates. This energy saving certificate is basically regulated through the PAT scheme, and this PAT scheme became effective in around 2012. And so the idea is again to reduce to lead to energy savings and to reduce energy emissions. Basically, the idea is to lead that these companies are saving some energies from their existing operations, and then they are issued these energy saving certificates. And these energy saving certificates are again in a similar way like RECs. They are also tradable in the exchange. So the process is that when you achieve the targets, because these both the RECs and the energy saving certificates, they both work in the regulated markets, and when any obligated entities. So obligated entities are those entities which are mandated as per the regulated markets to for these RECs or like for these initiatives, I would say. So there is a list of entities which are mandatorily required to reduce and or to source energy from renewable sources, this amount of energy, or to lead to these many energy savings that should happen in those entities. So those obligated entities, if they are able to achieve these savings, then they are able to achieve the target, then they are given these credits. And these credits, RECs or energy saving certificates, are ultimately they can be traded in the Indian exchange market or in the Power Grid exchange of Power Grid of Exchange of India Limited, right? So they can be traded in these markets. So these are the regulated markets. So what I'm trying to bring out here is that this carbon credit is not a new concept. This concept has already been established and is already in practice in the Indian market also. Now, not just the Indian market, but even if we look at the global markets, then in the global markets, these carbon credit markets are already existing. So if we look at the global market, then the European Union Emission Trading System, EU ETS, is the world's largest carbon market. Now, and it's one of the oldest also in respect to the carbon markets. Now, this European Union Emission Trading System works on a different pattern. So there are different approaches also in which trading this carbon credit market works. There is one offset approach, and there is one, like at the global level I'm talking about, there is one offset approach and there is one emission trading systems approach. So in an offset approach is basically based on a project. I would say it's a project-based approach. So in an offset approach, the entities take projects, and those projects then ultimately those projects helps in reducing the emissions from the compared to the baseline emissions. The targets are set, and then once those targets are achieved, and an entity who takes those targets is eligible for carbon credits. And similarly, there is an emission trading approach. In the emission trading approach, there are certain segment or certain set of companies which are defined, which are high emitting from the regulatory point of view. They are defined by the regulators and they are given targets. So it works on a cap and trade system where there is a cap on all of these set of industries or companies. There is a cap on their emission, and once they are able to achieve, if they are emitting below that cap, then they become eligible for the carbon credits. And then once there is an accumulation of these carbon credits, then these credits can be traded in the exchange, I would say, in any country irrespective, right? So EU ETS is a very mature carbon market. It's not a recently developed market. Then similarly, there are different carbon markets like California cap and trade programs. Then China is also coming up with its China national ETS. Then these are some of the examples of regulated markets. Then there are also voluntary markets which are there. For instance, like two of the most prominent voluntary carbon credit markets is Verra Standards, which is an NGO and which came out with its own carbon credit market, and the other is the Gold Standard. So these are the two most prominent voluntary markets at a global level. So this is a nutshell about what all carbon credit markets are existing at the global level and how it is being evolving in the Indian landscape. Now we can move to the next slide. So now let's just talk about India's carbon credit trading scheme mechanism. So before we talk, let's just understand the series of events that took place before this carbon credit trading scheme became effective, I would say. So it is again, India has accumulated a lot of carbon credits, I would say. It was the biggest beneficiary of clean development mechanisms under Kyoto Protocol, where so under the Kyoto Protocol, there were thousands of projects were registered with UNFCCC to earn certified emission reductions. So these certified emissions, so with different markets, the certificate name, or I would say the nomenclature of these certificates vary, but the baseline concept is same. So under the Kyoto Protocol, the Indian projects were registered, and there were a lot of Indian projects registered, and they earned the certified emission reduction. So this is also a carbon certificate only. Then in 2022, there came an amendment in line with what was happening at the and the accumulation of the carbon credits with the Indian companies in 2022, an amendment came in Energy Conservation Act, and the Energy Conservation Act empowered central government to set up carbon credit trading scheme. So that's when the carbon credit, the first foundation of the carbon credit trading scheme was placed in 2022 when the Energy Conservation Act was amended and central government was empowered to set up this trading scheme. Then in 2023, Ministry of Power, in consultation with Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change, notified Carbon Credit Trading Scheme 2023 under this amended act, which happened under the amendment which happened in the Energy Conservation Act in 2022. There was a notified carbon credit trading scheme which rolled out in 2023. And then in July 2024, there was a detailed compliance mechanism that was published with respect to the carbon credit trading scheme mechanism, that how this trading scheme will work. In the current scenario also, not that India has started trading these credits, it is just the compliance mechanism that has been rolled out. And we will understand what is this compliance mechanism as we move forward in this slide. So this became effective from July 2024. Now, the idea of this this carbon credit trading scheme is also to ensure that there is a unified Indian carbon market. So since we were discussing before about the renewable energy certificates or energy saving certificates, so these certificates are in a way promoting or encouraging companies to reduce emissions. So the idea of this carbon credit trading scheme is to come out with a unified market where India as a whole and all these certificates are combined into one carbon credit certificate itself. And there are not multiple, I would say multiple variations of this certificate, only be it REC or the energy saving certificates. So the idea is to make a unified market, carbon market. Now, how does it work? We'll just give a gist and then we will understand about, there are two different types of markets, I would say. There is one, compliance mechanism, and the other is voluntary mechanism. Now, compliance mechanism is a regulated market, and voluntary mechanism is as the name suggests, is an optional market. With the compliance mechanism, there are the regulator itself has decided the set of the entities or the obligated entities which have to meet the specified GHG emission targets. So if they meet these GHG emission targets, then they will get carbon credits. If they do not meet these GHG emission targets, then they will have to purchase these carbon credits. So this is how, giving a very brief gist of these mechanisms, and then when we move down, we will understand in detail that how these markets work. Then the other one is the voluntary mechanism. So under the voluntary mechanism, companies themselves create the projects, they lay the projects for reducing emissions. Then these projects, through these projects, if they are verified and certified by the accredited agencies, then these projects ultimately earn carbon credits, and these credits can then be traded amongst entities. So this is how these two different types of markets work. And there is an offset mechanism within these markets. This is how it is working. Now, the third aspect is to measure against the risk of uncontrolled emissions. Then obviously this is an obvious thing that if India is coming out with its carbon credit trading scheme, then the ultimate idea is to control the emissions and to ensure that if also in a way, if we look at it, that it allows for, so there is a net of in net India as a country should be able to reduce emissions. So there are certain, we also need to understand that there are certain sectors in which the emissions can be reduced only to a certain level, I would say. For instance, coal mining, right? So there will be emissions or happening in the coal mining. So we can only reduce it to certain levels. So, but then this emission should be offset with certain other sector wherein the emissions can be reduced. For instance, banking sector. So they have less emissions. So with this system in place, the ultimate idea is that with 1 ton of CO2 equivalent, the credit that any entity is receiving, it is allowing some other entity to emit that CO2 equivalent in a regulated framework. I would not say that it gives you a permission to emit in an uncontrolled way. And that's what this market is or scheme is suggesting, that it is important to ensure and to measure what is the risk of these uncontrolled emissions. So there has to be a proper control with the regulator support in this scenario. We can move to the next slide. So this now when we look at the carbon credit trading scheme in the current scenario, so there is a transition, as I was mentioning before also, that there is a transition that is happening from the existing PAT scheme to this CCTS scheme. So if we look at the existing PAT scheme, then under the PAT scheme, there were, and the PAT scheme became effective in 2012, and the name of this scheme, like perform, achieve, and trade. The name of the scheme itself suggests that there are targets of energy savings which are given by the regulator to certain high energy emitting, I would say, industries. So there are 9 industries which are laid down, and those 9 sectors have to ensure that they are saving energies. So they need to perform to achieve that target. And once the target is achieved, then they can trade those certificates. So this is the idea about the perform, achieve, and trade scheme of this scheme is also regulated by Bureau of Energy Efficiency, which is the administrator of carbon credit trading scheme also. So the administrator remains to be same, and this existing scheme of PAT, which came in 2012, is undergoing a gradual transition, I would say, to carbon credit trading scheme. So there is a transition that is happening because the idea or basically there is a shift in the focus. So in the PAT scheme, there was the focus was on energy savings. Now under this carbon credit trading scheme, the focus is on reducing GHG emissions. So that's how there is a shift in the lens, I would say, but the crux or the bottom line of both the schemes remains to be same, to ultimately save, reduce emissions or save energies. So that is how this scheme is transitioning. And since it is governed by the same regulator, BEE, that is how this transition will be done by BEE itself. So if we look at the calculation or the approach under the PAT scheme, then under the PAT scheme, the formula is total energy consumed in plant boundary upon equivalent product or output. So whatever is the energy consumed, and then we are measuring it against the per product. So how much we are saving when we compare it with the previous year. Then under the carbon credit trading scheme, the target is the measurement is done through total GHG emissions upon equivalent product or output. So only the emission, this is how there has been a shift from energy consumed to GHG emissions to reduce the emissions. And this will also be done in a phased manner, and it is still under development. We can move to the next slide. So now let us look at the constitutional framework of carbon credit trading scheme. So the National Steering Committee, or I would say the nodal agency of CCTS, is Ministry of Power and Ministry of Environment, Finance and Climate Change. So, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. So these are the two nodal agencies which are responsible for the governance of the Indian carbon market and overseeing the functioning of the scheme in at the top level. So they are the National Steering Committee. Then comes the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. So Bureau of Energy Efficiency is the administrator of this scheme. Now Bureau of Energy Efficiency is responsible for issuing certificates. So they are responsible for all the administrative tasks, I would say, which ranges from certificate issuance to how to certificate issuance, measuring, recommending targets, measuring them. Then there are accredited agencies which are also certified by Bureau of Energy Efficiency only. So they are overall administrator of the scheme is Bureau of Energy Efficiency. Also, this Bureau of Energy Efficiency has already and experience with the PAT scheme. So they are the so I think this is the best body to take care of the administrator. Then the Grid Controller of India is responsible to maintain all the documentation work. I would say all the record keeping is done with the Grid Controller of India. So they maintain a registry of all obligated and non-obligated entities in the Indian carbon market. They keep record of all transactions. So they are like an iWatch. Then the next is the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, CERC. CERC acts as the regulator for trading activities. So CERC is also acting as a regulator for RECs and ESCs. So similarly, they are responsible for acting as a regulator in case of carbon credit market also. Then the ultimate is the power exchange, which are facilitating the trading platform. There are two prominent power exchanges which are in operation, which are in function for now. That is Indian Energy Exchange and Power Exchange of India Limited. So this is about the framework of carbon credit trading scheme, the institutional framework. We can move to the next slide. So as we were discussing about compliance mechanism. So now in the compliance mechanism, there are 9 specific sectors which are included under the compliance mechanism. These sectors are same that were there in the PAT scheme. So the PAT scheme is also applicable to these 9 sectors only, which is aluminium, chlor-alkali, cement, fertilizer, iron and steel, pulp and paper, petrochemicals, petroleum refinery, and textile. So the idea behind selection of these 9 sectors is because the regulator feels that they are the highly emitting sectors which are currently there in the Indian market, and that's why first the regulator want to come out with the or a mandate regulating these specific 9 sectors first, and they are kept same which were there in the PAT scheme. The idea is just changed from energy savings to reducing emissions in the current carbon credit trading schemes. We can move to the next slide. Next slide, please. Right. So as I think as we were discussing about the compliance mechanism, so this mechanism under the Indian carbon market, where the obligated entities shall comply with the prescribed GHG emission norms notified by the central government. So there are norms which are notified by central government. So under the compliance mechanism, as the central government is the agency which is responsible to set up the carbon credit trading scheme, and the central government has been empowered by Energy Conservation Act, and the central government has prescribed certain GHG emission norms or the GHG emission reduction targets, and the obligated entities have to comply with those targets. Then there is a transition that we already discussed in detail from the existing energy intensive sectors of Perform, Achieve and Trade scheme to an energy efficiency based compliance to reduce GHG emissions. So this transition is happening from the PAT scheme to CCTS scheme. We have already covered this in detail in the earlier slide. So we can move to the next slide. Right. Now let us understand about the compliance mechanism in detail for the obligated entities. So as I was mentioning before, that this compliance mechanism, how does it work for obligated entities in the carbon credit market? So there is a system where the carbon credit trading, under the carbon credit trading scheme, where the registered entities, as we discussed, that the registered entities are known as obligated entities, and they must comply with greenhouse gas emission intensity targets set by the central government. So central government, so we have there are like if we talk about EU ETS or the global framework, there are different offset approaches which are followed, right? We discussed about the project-based approach and emission trading scheme approach, but then the Indian, I would say the Indian compliance or the regulated market has come out with a very simple approach, which simple and easy to understand approach, wherein they focus, they say that the emission targets, the GHG emission targets will be defined by the regulator, by the central government, for instance, and the obligated entities, whoever are the mandatory entities, they have to comply with those targets. And also, just to give you a background, currently the GHG emissions, the gases which are included in the GHG emissions in Indian context is only CO2 and PFCs. So these are the only two gases which are monitored currently. Obviously, the ambit of these gases will also increase, but in the current scenario, only these two gases are the target is set only for them, and they are only monitored, right? So the target setting is done by central government. Now, whatever and the targets are also set in terms of tons of CO2 equivalent per unit of product. So in this case, a company, any obligated entity, is not required to additionally lay down or to additionally establish any new project per se. They just need to improve their operational efficiencies, I would say, their manufacturing capabilities, to ensure that they are able to reduce the per ton of CO2 equivalent, basically per unit of product, they are able to reduce CO2 per unit of product in terms of terms, obviously. So the idea is to measure it on product. And that is why it is important to ensure that the manufacturing capabilities of these obligated entities, they become more sustainable. Then obligated entities must achieve these targets, each compliance year. So there is a defined trajectory, I would say. So in the regulation, it is defined that this emission targets will be the trajectory defined as 6 years. So the central government laid the emission intensity target for a period of 6 years, and they will be monitored on at a very yearly basis, basically, right? They will be monitored on a yearly basis for a period of the compliance trajectory, which is normally 6 years. Now, the entities which are exceeding targets, they will receive, basically, if they are the per CO2, we will also discuss this with an illustration, but if they are exceeding their targets, then they receive these carbon credit certificate, and if they fail to meet these targets, then these obligated entities are mandated to purchase carbon credit certificate, and that's where the offset mechanism comes into play. So that is how this compliance mechanism works. And in case of a compliance mechanism, this is a mandatory practice. So if an entity is not able to meet their targets, then they have to purchase these compliance these carbon credit certificates. That is about compliance mechanism. Now, the purpose is to mandate GHG emission intensity targets for energy intensive industries. So the idea is that the energy intensive industries, and that's why the focus is only on 9 industries, because the idea is to reduce their emissions first, because this will be implemented in a phased manner, and the idea is to reduce or to catch hold of those industries which are emitting high energies. So entities must comply with the targets or they will face penalties. So if they do not comply with the target, they either buy these carbon credit certificates or they will ultimately face some penalties. And the emissions and the verifications of these target settings and performance is done by the accredited agencies, which are accredited by Bureau of Energy Efficiency. So this is how a compliance market works. Now we can move to the next slide. Right. So as I was discussing, so there is a graph for ease of understanding. Now let's say in case of a compliance mechanism, there is a baseline, and the baseline has been defined in the regulation in case of Indian credit market as 23-24. So financial year 23-24 is taken as the baseline. Now in the baseline, for a particular segment, I would say aluminium, for instance, the baseline, the current emission that is happening is 2.5 tons CO2 equivalent, okay, per ton. So per product. So now this 2.5 trillion CO2 equivalent of emissions is happening, for instance, in case of an aluminium sector in the baseline year, that is 23-24. Now the central government came out with the emissions, GHG emission target of 2.2 tons of CO2 equivalent. So the central government came out with the notification that in this industry, 2.2 tons of CO2 equivalent is the target emission that can happen. So the aim is to reduce the emission, and that's what they committed, or that's what they required these entities. Now there are 2 scenarios. So in case 1, the target is exceeding. So for example, the target was 2.2 tons of CO2 equivalent. To achieve this target in case of an aluminium sector, now an obligated entity achieved 2 tons of CO2 equivalent. So there is a reduction achieved more than the target, right? What is expected. So an obligated entity performed more than what was expected. And that's how they are eligible for issuance of credits. So they will be issued credits for this. These carbon credits will be issued to these entities, this entity in this case. And these credits will be issued by the regulator only, right? And so basically the issuance of the credit happens in a primary market. Now case 2 is a shortfall in credit. Now in case 2, credits are to be, the target is 2.2 tons of CO2 equivalent, but the achieved an obligated entity emitted 2.4 tons of CO2 equivalent. So they exceeded basically there is a shortfall in target. That's what we'll say. That target was 2.2, but there is 2.4 tons of CO2 equivalent. So now, in this case, since there is a shortfall, so there is a mandatory requirement to purchase the carbon credits from other entities, right? Now, in the second scenario, the offset mechanism comes into picture. So when now in this case, the differential amount, that is 0.2 tons of CO2 equivalent of the carbon credits, are to be purchased from other players, I would say. So this is how the offset will happen, and then the obligated entity will be at the target. Otherwise, they will be required to face penalties. Now, in the first scenario, the target is there is a reduction in target, more than the target is achieved. Now, in the first scenario, where the obligated entity exceeded the target, in this case, the obligated entity will be eligible for carbon certificates. There is a credit of carbon certificates. Now, these certificates, now with this entity, there are two choices. Either these certificates can be traded in times to come, when obviously the trading becomes platforms are accessible. So these credits can be traded, or these credits can also be kept with the company only, the entity itself. And why they will keep these credits is because in this particular year they have achieved excess. But let's say in some other year or in some other project, if they are emitting more, then they can also offset these credits within themselves. So that is why sometimes an obligated entity also prefers holding these credits rather than selling it in the open market. So this is how it works, the carbon credit market. Also, there can be other reasons, like you want to it can also be taken like an investment scenario, where the company wants to keep it and hold it for a longer term to basically trade later and maybe earn profits out of it. So this is also one thing. So, but this is how the carbon credit market works in case of compliance mechanism. We can move to the next slide now. So now let's look at the cycle. So for instance, there is a trajectory period of, let's say, 6 years for achieving the target, right? But then the compliance and the monitoring happens every year. So that is happening every year. So for example, in this case, the baseline year is year 0. Now in the compliance cycle 1, so compliance cycle 1 is 1 financial year, I would say. So the target period starts at the quarter 1 of the financial year, and it ends at quarter 4. Now, after the end of the financial year, there in the next compliance cycle, in the next financial year, there is a verification process which happens for the previous year. And this verification happens within 3 months. So it happens by the end of the quarter 1, this verification should be completed. And then this verification and monitoring will be done by the accredited agencies again. So not that any agency can come and conduct this verification, but it has to be done by the accredited agencies. Then once this verification is done, then there is an issuance of carbon credit certificates. And these carbon credit certificates are issued by the end of quarter 2, that is within 6 months of the financial year completion. And these credits can be traded only with the 9 months, that is by the end of quarter 3 only, they can be traded after demonstration of the compliance. So after demonstrating that they have been compliant, then only they can be traded. So this happens in case of each compliance period for the trajectory or the targeted period. Let's see if in this case the trajectory period is 6 years, then this will happen every 6 years. Now, there can also be a scenario where, for example, in the first year, the target is achieved and there are carbon credits that are credited. But then in the second compliance year, the target is not achieved. Then again, there will be then there will be offsetting that can be done. So that's why it is sometimes advisable for an obligated entity to hold these carbon credits rather than trading it in the market. Because if in the coming compliance cycle, if it is not achieved, the target is not achieved, then they will need those credits to offset in the coming years. Now, also at the end of the compliance or at the end of the trajectory period of, let's say, 6 years, there are certain carbon credits which are kept with the company, then they have to be surrendered in case certain timelines are not met. So there is also a surrender of carbon credit happens to ensure that there is no double accounting of these certificates also. So, and this mechanism is still it is taking shape. I would say that still it is under it is at a very nascent stage only. But this is about the compliance cycle. Now we can move to the next slide. Voluntary mechanism. So we will begin voluntary mechanism. I'll just take 2 minutes break and then we begin with the voluntary mechanisms. In the meanwhile, do we want to take the questions if anyone can answer from the SRSB team? Do we have any questions or do we want to take the questions in between?
Ma'am, there are questions. If you want, we can take them.
So maybe before we start the voluntary mechanism, we will take a few questions and then start it, right? So that they don't take too long.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah, so just in 2 minutes, we'll start.
Okay, ma'am, you'll let me know when to start.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello. Hello. Yes, Priyal, we can maybe take the question in between.
Okay, ma'am. Yeah. The first question is, how will India's CCTs impact the existing voluntary and compliance carbon markets?
How does
How will India's CCTs impact the existing voluntary and compliance carbon markets?
So the thing is that voluntary and compliance markets are a part of India's CCTS only, right? First of all, so they are not separate. Now, if we talk about the compliance market, then there are two certificates that are already trading in similar types of markets. I would say they are renewable energy certificates and energy saving certificates. And that's what I have mentioned before also, that there is a gradual transition that will take place from the energy saving certificates to the carbon credit certificates only, because they are regulated by, or the administrator, and the like the body which takes care is the same, that is BEE is taking care of the PAT scheme also. So they will ultimately, it will become a unified carbon market only, where the existing certificates that are being traded, which are only RECs and ESCs in case of energies, and they will be ultimately transitioned to the carbon credit markets only. So that's how it will happen. Yes, Real.
What lessons can India learn from global carbon trading system?
So, there are obviously different mechanisms that are working, and this is still, I would say, India has considered the existing markets when we are talking about EU ETS. So, it is one of the oldest one, right? They are working on a project-based approach or a emission trading system. So, we are also incorporating the success, or I would say the best practices from those markets into the Indian carbon markets. Like a project-based approach has been taken in case of a voluntary mechanism. So there are lessons learned obviously from those markets, and they are being incorporated. But there are still markets which are evolving in this scenario. So not that we have a lot of established markets currently, there are still markets which are evolving. So, and India is also one of the countries which is in this transition of creating its own carbon credit market. So, obviously, they will take into considerations they must have taken into consideration, I would say.
What is the risk of greenwashing in voluntary carbon offsetting?
So, in voluntary carbon offsetting, obviously, there can be a risk of greenwashing. I won't deny that fact completely. But that is why there is a lot of thrust that is being given in the compliance document also, on the accredited agencies, or on the monitoring and reporting, to take care of the monitoring and reporting on a regular basis by these. So these are the kind of steps that are being taken to ensure that it is that there is no greenwashing, or the targets are being monitored continuously. I mean, that's all is happening for now.
How are carbon credits accounted for in ESG reporting framework?
So carbon credits are accounted in ESG. So if we talk about the ESG reporting framework, then I think the most regulated reporting framework is Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report. And if we look at the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report, then in this year itself, in the last financial year, the XBRL format came out with the disclosure of green credits under Principle 6. So although it was a leadership indicator, and most of the companies have not reported it, because it came, I would say it came at a very last moment. So, and I am also I've been preparing these reports for certain of the listed companies. So I am working in this domain. So this disclosure came at the very end, I would say, when the companies were almost uploading their reports, their XBRL utilities. So there is one green credit disclosure, that how many green credits are taken by the company and by their value chain partners. So this is one disclosure in case of leader, which is disclosed in leadership indicator Principle 6. Then also there is a disclosure with regards to the PAT scheme, which is done under Principle 2. So there are disclosures which are happening. These are the disclosures which are happening in case of carbon credit or in a similar kind of a disclosures in case of a reporting mechanism if we talk about.
How do carbon markets interact with national climate policies like carbon taxes or cap and trade systems?
Carbon markets interact with international policies. Are you using the word interact? Did I heard right?
Yes, ma'am. Interact with national climate policies.
So I think when we were discussing about the Paris Agreement and when we were discussing about the global, like in the introduction, when I was discussing about the goal of, or like the global goal, I would say, to combat climate change is to ensure that we are not exceeding, but the average temperature is not exceeding, like it's below 2 degrees Celsius or 1.5 degrees Celsius, right? So ultimately, to reach that global goal, these carbon emissions will also, or reducing the carbon emissions will in a way help India as a country to achieve its global goal, its national goal of reaching the global goal, I would say. So that's how it is interlinked in a way. So obviously, if India wants to achieve something as a nation, then there are we as a company or we as individuals need to work on it at different fronts. So that's how it is happening. So India is following a top-down approach to impart these practices.
Which
So-
sectors are in? Sorry.
Yes, please, Priya.
Yeah, ma'am, you can continue.
No, you please say.
Which
Are there
sectors
any
are?
questions
Ma'am, one last question.
okay.
Which sectors are included in compliance mechanism or CCTS?
So I already there was a slide specifically on that on the sectors which were included. So maybe we can go back to the slide. So there are 9. But meanwhile, someone please navigate back to the sector slide. Yeah, back. One back. Yeah. So these are the sectors which are included in the compliance mechanism. So these are the 9 sectors which are included in the compliance mechanism for now. They are same which were included under the PAT scheme also. So the sectors are same, and that also answers the question which was raised earlier, that how are we how these compliance markets will get merged. So there is a transition that is happening already to obviously create a unified carbon market. So if there are certificates, energy saving certificates or renewable energy certificates, so all the carbon credit certificate, the entire idea of all these certificates is to reduce emissions only, right? So that is why India is targeting to create a unified carbon market for where all these certificates can be traded under one platform, right? Priyal, can we go ahead or any other questions?
Yes, ma'am, we can go ahead.
Okay. So we can start with the voluntary mechanism. Now, let's look at the voluntary mechanism. So we discussed about the compliance mechanism in detail. Now, in case of voluntary mechanism, there are non-obligated entities because the obligated entities are already covered under the compliance mechanism. Now, the non-obligated entities, so this is a voluntary, as the name suggests that it's not mandatory. So it is based on any like individual company's willingness to generate carbon credits, right? So it allows the non-obligated entities to voluntarily register projects for GHG emission reduction, removal, or avoidance. So now, as I was specifying before about the project-based approach, so this voluntary mechanism is basically it is based on the concept of voluntary mechanism is project-based approach only, wherein non-obligated entity decides to lay down a project to reduce their emissions, right? And then now, when we were discussing that these projects also must meet the eligibility criteria, and when a company comes with a proposal that this is the project, like they want to keep a project of, let's say, green hydrogen project, for example. A company wants to come out with a green hydrogen project, and the company laid down, okay, that this is the baseline. So in case of a project based approach, there is a baseline assessment that is done with that how much emissions will be done in before, like without the project. So when we were looking at the compliance mechanism, then there were emission which were measured based on the year the baseline assessment was done. But in case of the voluntary mechanism, the baseline assessment is done basis the emission that will be done without project, that is baseline. And the target is that if, let's say, a green hydrogen project is implemented, then what will be the emission? That is the target, right? So we are talking about baseline, and then we are talking about target. So this is target in case of project-based approach. Now, if in case of a voluntary market, if the target is, again, this is the target, if the target less than the target is done, is emission is done, then there is again a credit in voluntary market, and more emission is done than the target, then again there is then there is obviously no credit is there. So is in case of a voluntary market, there is no offsetting which is done, because they are not obligated to purchase the carbon credit certificates. But then in this case, they will these projects should ultimately lead to generation of carbon credits, and that is why only any non-obligated entity would enter into this space in first place. So this scenario of exceeding, I would say, a shortfall in the target should not happen in case of a voluntary mechanism. So allows non-obligated entities to voluntarily register for projects, and again, these projects validation and verification is done by accredited agencies, by BEE. The process is that the non-obligated entities, they register their projects for GHG emission reduction, removal, or avoidance. So first thing is that the registry of the project is done. Now, once the registry of the project is done, projects are validated and verified by accredited agencies. So not that the projects are accepted without validation. So if a non-obligated entity comes out with a project, then its validation and verification is done by accredited agencies. The validated projects, then they receive the carbon credit certificates if they meet their targets, and then these certificates can be used for offset. Now, whatever carbon credits are generated by these non-obligated entities, basically, they will be used for offsetting. So if I am generating a carbon credit, so I'll use those credits to sell to an entity, to an obligated entity, which needs it for offsetting, wherein the target, there is a shortfall in meeting the target, right? So that's how the offset mechanism works in case, and that's why there are voluntary mechanism or non-obligated entities which are there into this which are willing to participate in such projects, and which are there into the market. We can move to the next slide. So now these voluntary mechanism is also applicable in a phased manner, and these are certain sectors on which the voluntary mechanism or these are the specific sectors where the voluntary mechanism or the non-obligated entities firstly can come up with these kind of projects. So if we also, there is an illustration given of the kind of projects that can be taken. So if we look at the energy, so the sectors are energy, industries, waste, agriculture, forestry, transport, construction, fugitive emissions, solvent use, and carbon capture and storage. So the inclusions in this is renewable energy projects, like obviously the project should ultimately lead to reduction in emissions, right? So renewable energy projects, energy efficiency projects, biomass projects, but also there are certain exceptions like large hydroelectric projects. So it should not happen that the project cost is very, like, it's a very costly project, and when we do a cost benefit analysis, or let's say when we compare the carbon credit certificates that are generated from the project and the cost, then that should be at equilibrium, I would say. Not that the cost is, it's a very hefty cost, and it is ultimately not generating credits also. Then industries made cement, steel, petrochemicals, fertilizers, they will be covered. Then waste handling and disposal projects, methane capture projects. Then the exceptions can be non-biodegradable waste project can be an exception. So it has to be environmental friendly also. Then if we look at the agriculture, then sustainable, if we look at the agriculture, then sustainable agriculture projects, agroforestry, soil carbon sequestrations. Then exceptions can be monoculture plantations, forestry, afforestation, reforestation, forest conservation projects. Exceptions can be commercial logging. Then transport, public transportation improvements, electric vehicle infrastructure. Exceptions can be fossil fuel based transports, because we want to shift to renewable energies. And construction, energy efficient building projects, sustainable urban development project. So I'm not sure if you all have heard about this green building concept. So nowadays, it is becoming a very prominent to notice that there are green building certifications, and the buildings are built in a way. I recently visited an office where there was zero emissions, so net zero emission in a building. So they built their building in the infrastructure was such that the air quality index, the lightning, the emissions from the within the building, like there is a net zero emission in the building. So I was really impressed with the infrastructure and the sustainable, I would say sustainable aspects that were taken care while building that building. So these are again very different types of projects that are coming into. Then with fugitive emissions, methane capture from mining and oil extraction, leak detection and repair programs. Then exceptions can be routine flaring, solvent use, reduction of solvent emissions, recovery and recycling of solvent destruction is exception. Carbon capture, CO2 capture from industrial processes, geological storage of CO2, utilization of CO2, and exception can be temporary storage solutions. So this is how these are like just certain illustrations of what kind of projects are included in the voluntary markets and what can be the key exceptions. Obviously, this is an exhaustive list. There can be further inclusions and exclusions also. But the sectors remains to be fixed, and there are two phases. So phase 1 and phase 2 sectors are included in this slide. Now we can move to the next slide. So let's just understand the certificate issuance process. In detail. So the certificate issuance process, first we will decode what is the certificate issuance process in case of a compliance mechanism, and then we will understand the issuance process in case of voluntary mechanism. Now, target. So first thing that is done in case of a compliance mechanism is to set the target. Now the regulator is responsible to setting the target in case of a compliance mechanism like BEE. For instance, in case of Indian Carbon Credit Trading Scheme, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency recommends emission reduction targets to the Ministry of Power. Now these targets are in terms of ton CO2 equivalent per unit of product. To kindly emphasize this, that the targets are set per unit of product, and they are while setting these targets, the technological feasibility and implementation costs are also considered by the BEE while setting these targets. Right now, moving forward, the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. So MOP, Ministry of Power, recommends these targets to Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change under the ambit of Environment Protection Act. Now these finally then the obligated entities must meet the emission targets as notified by MOE FCC. So ultimately, BEE in consultation with MOP sets the targets which are set in terms of tons CO2 equivalent per unit of product. And then finally, these targets are notified by Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. And these targets are notified to the obligated entities. And those obligated entities, they are mandated under the compliance mechanism to meet these targets. Then apart from this, there can also be other targets, additional targets, such as non-fossil fuel energy usage as per MOP notification. So there can be some additional targets also in addition to these carbon emission targets. Then if the targets are met, as we discussed before also through the graph, that if the targets are met, then the carbon credit certificates are issued when the entities exceed these emission reduction targets. And these certificates, so when these certificates are issued, then the obligated entity need to register itself, right? When these certificates are issued, then the obligated entity need to register itself and need to register itself, right? And then these certificates can also be traded. So, right, just a second. So these are so as I was discussing that once these targets are met, then these the carbon credit certificates are issued when entities exceed emission reduction targets, and these certificates are registered and they can be finally traded. So entities not meeting these targets can purchase. So if in case of a compliance mechanism, if the targets are not met, then there has to be a purchase of these carbon credit certificates, and if the targets are met, then there is an accumulation of these carbon credit certificates. Again, these certificates can be registered, and then finally they can be traded basis the discretion of the obligated entity. So this is how the certificate issuance procedure looks like in case of a compliance. Now we can move to the next slide. We can move to the next slide. Right. So now we look at the certificate issuance procedure in case of a voluntary market. So we discussed about the compliance market. Now in case of a voluntary market, there is a project registration that happens in the first place. So entities, the non-obligated entities, they register projects with the Bureau of Energy Efficiency or an accredited agencies. Then the baseline assessment is done of these projects, like what will be the emission in case like without these projects, what will be the emission. So that will be the baseline assessment. Baseline establishment will be done, and basis that what is the target that we want to achieve with the implementation of this project. Then there is data collection and monitoring. So collect GHG emission data and document reduction measures, then implement a monitoring plan. So there will be, because in case of voluntary, so there is in case of a voluntary mechanism, since the targets are not set by the regulator, so there will be a very strict monitoring mechanism in place and plan in place to ensure, and that is why the project itself at the when the project is submitted, at that instance only the project is validated to ensure that the data that is being submitted, and we were talking, there was a query about greenwashing also. So there is a detailed analysis of the project details which is done by the accredited agencies to ensure that the emissions or the targets that they are, there is no, I would say that if the target is not overachieved targets or are not put, like for instance, with this project we can only reduce, like there is a 200 tons of CO2 equivalent in the baseline assessment, and in the target we wrote that there can be a reduction by 100 CO2 tons of equivalent, but and actually there can only be a reduction by 50 CO2 equivalent. So the idea is that there should not be any unnecessary accumulation of carbon credits in case of voluntary market, and that is why the accredited agencies do a proper validation and verification of the project itself, and then of that there is a data collection and monitoring that happens at a regular basis and as per the plan. Now, these annual GHG emissions reports are submitted with the emission intensity and reduction data, that what is the intensity and reduction that is achieved. So there is a submission of reports that happen. Then accredited agencies review reports and conduct audit and inspection. So as you can see in this process also, that there is a lot of evaluation, verification and monitoring which is happening in case of a voluntary mechanism to cut those chances of greenwashing, or I would say to reduce that there can be any wrong data which is being published or any commitment which is made and it's not realistic. So that is why such a robust mechanism of monitoring and verification is happening in this project-based approach. Then these verification agencies submit a report confirming accuracy and compliance to BEE. So they submit these reports to Bureau of Energy Efficiency, and then BEE reviews and approves the verification report, and if it is satisfied, then they issue these carbon credit certificates. These CCCs represent whatever is a verified emission reduction happens, notify entities of issued CCC and track them in the registry. Then once the carbon credit certificates are issued, then these certificates are basically the obligated and the non-obligated entity need to register themselves with the Grid Controller of India, and then only they there is a process of registering these certificates with the Grid Controller of India, and once the registration is done and the certificate of registration is issued to the obligated and non-obligated entities, then they can later on trade the CCCs in the carbon market or used for compliance. So this is how the this is how the voluntary mechanism market works. Now we can move. So we have discussed about the compliance mechanism, and we have also discussed about the voluntary mechanism. Now we can move to the next slide. So let us also look, so I've just included one case study of Tesla with regards to the carbon credits. So it is one of the very prominent case studies, I would say, which depicts that how obviously how Tesla and how Elon Musk being foresaw, I would say, this opportunity well before in time, and how they have utilized this carbon credit opportunity, and they have generated revenue out of this. So when so it's about the EV vehicles or the electric vehicles car manufacturing that Tesla did, right? So we all know that Tesla is a global leader in electric mobility and clean energy. Now, Tesla leveraged the carbon credit market as a strategic financial and sustainability tool. So they generated, the idea is that they generated carbon credits from its zero emission vehicle production. Tesla not only advanced its climate mission, but also strengthened its financial performance. So Tesla started manufacturing these electric vehicles or zero emission vehicle production way before any other player came into this market. So they manufactured these electric vehicles, and there were since they were the voluntary players in this market, they adopted, like they went into the voluntary framework, I would say, and then they came out with this project of electric vehicles manufacturing. Now they got this project approved by the regulators, and they generated there was a lot of accumulation of carbon credits certificates that happened in this journey. So they accumulated carbon credits from this model, and when the times were right and when these credits were saleable, I would say these instruments were tradable, they sold it in the market and they earned revenue out of it. So we see that carbon credit revenues have contributed significantly to Tesla's profitability, funding R&D and boosting shareholder values and reinforcing its global sustainable leadership. Now, obviously, when we narrate this story, it's not as easy as it sounds. There was certain set of challenges also in this entire setup. So some of the challenges is like high production cost of EVs and rising raw material prices. So obviously they entered into the market when they were like the new players into the market. So the prices and the production cost of the EVs were very high. So it was difficult to find the buyers in this segment and need to improve profitability without compromising. So it will, when the raw material prices and the production cost of manufacturing will increase, then obviously it will also impact the profitability and cash flows. So there was a pressure, and also not that since Tesla was one of the first company to enter into this market, then there were traditional automakers also, and there was a competition that they were facing from these automakers in cost efficiency and margin. So these were a certain set of challenges that they faced when they entered into the electric vehicle manufacturing market. The solutions are the generated carbon credits by producing EVs with zero tailpipe emissions. So that's what they registered this project with the regulator, and with this project they generated carbon credits. Now they sold these carbon credits to the automakers struggling to meet emission targets. So now when those automakers who fell under the obligated entities and they were struggling to meet their emission targets, they had to buy these credits in return for an offset. To offset their excess emissions, they need to buy these credits, and that's when Tesla sold these credits to those automakers. So this helped them to become a sustainability leader also, and they earn revenue out of this carbon credit certificates accumulation. So carbon credit revenues, they rose to $1.78 billion in 2022, and this composed 5% of Tesla's total revenue, and the net income margin rose to 14.7% in 2022, highest in Tesla's history. So this is what this was the impact that was created with this kind of an initiative in the financial outcome. So this was the financial outcome of this study. It helped offset raw material inflation. So these are all the benefits that they derive. High margin revenue stream they created with minimal operational cost. This is a very scalable business model with more EVs coming. There will be more credits and more revenues. And it also had a positive impact on ESG profile, like on sustainable focused investors. So it was in nutshell a win-win for Tesla. But in the shorter run, obviously there were challenges, but in the medium to long-term run, they derived a lot of benefit out of this carbon credit trading. So this was just an illustration of how these markets can work. Now we can move to our last slide, and then we can take the Q&As if any. So let's just move to the next slide. Right. So we have been discussing about the CCTS impact on existing markets. Now, again, to sum it up, I would say that ultimately this carbon credit trading scheme, the ultimate objective of this scheme is to help India to achieve the overall objective or the national objective, and to help in combating the climate change. So the ultimate objective is to achieve the India's commitment to be carbon neutral by 2070, and they look at these initiatives, these different set of initiatives to help India as a country to achieve the nationally determined contribution and to be in alignment with those contributions. But conversely, the impact of this can also lead to the increase in cost, basically. There will be an increase in cost because if we do not take the corrective actions or the right actions now, then there will be an economic impact on the country as a whole. So that is why India as a country, or we individuals or entities, need to take these initiatives and be a part of these initiatives. Then obviously these CCTS, they help in GHG emission reductions. So emphasis is on reducing the energies. So it doesn't matter that which certificates we are trading, RECs, ESCs, or carbon credits, but the idea is to create a unified carbon market and to ensure that ultimately India as a country is able to reduce its GHG emissions. That is the ultimate idea or ultimate goal of these initiatives, be it the carbon credit initiatives, be it the reporting initiatives. All those initiatives in nutshell should make India more sustainable. Then there is a participation in development. So to enhance business and industry participation, there are efforts which are happening in the existing carbon credit scheme, and there is a transition which will happen from the expansion which will happen from the compliance mechanism to voluntary mechanism, from covering 9 sectors of industries to more industries and to basically all the segments, all the different segments. So that is how the development and the participation of all these industries and segments will take place in CCTS. And obviously there is a need. Still, we as a country are at the very nascent stage of this development, and we as a country needs to have a robust legal framework before we start trading and before this because it came into effect, but it is still not implemented. So before this scheme is being implemented, there needs to be a strong, robust mechanism in place. And that is what is happening. That is all that we discussed with regards to the carbon credit markets in India. Also, there is another newer concept with regards to green credits, which is, again, it's a very new concept that came now. And the idea is not to reduce the emissions. In case of green credits, the idea is to undertake certain projects which helps in creating there is a positive impact on the environment, I would say, be it afforestations, like there are plantations which takes place. So these kind of initiatives are also being promoted, which with regards to the green credits also. So it's a new concept. But still, the focus and the implementation of the carbon credits is what will take place first. And then obviously, currently, India only talked about carbon credits or energy. The focus is only on emission reduction on energy. But then there are also other aspects to be covered, be it waste and water management. And sooner there will be credits in those aspects also, like there will be a regulated market to ensure that the waste and water is also under the waste generation and the water consumption is also at a basically there is at an optimized level, I would say. So that is what will happen in times to come. And this is all from my side with respect to the carbon credits markets in India. And then now I would be happy to take any questions that you all have. So we can move to the last.
Okay, ma'am, I'll start with the questions now.
Yes, please.
How will verification and oversight be conducted in India's CCTS?
Sorry, can you come again?
Hello?
Yeah, can you come again, please?
How will verification and oversight be conducted in India's CCTS?
So verification will be conducted in India CCTS through the accredited agencies, which will be accredited by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, which is basically the controller of this initiative. So they will be responsible for selecting those agencies, and those agencies, those accredited agencies, will conduct this verification and validation of data in different stages that we discussed in the mechanisms.
Can Indian companies replicate Tesla's carbon credit strategy? If yes, how?
So that is still, I would say, a question. I mean, the thing is that Tesla, for instance, took this under a voluntary, like undertook this initiative under a voluntary mechanism, right? But if I talk about India's carbon credit market, then still there is no implementation that has happened, right? Still we are at a very nascent stage with respect to the voluntary markets. Like the first focus of the India carbon credit trading scheme would be on the compliance mechanism, where the obligated entities will be the in the first phase they will be on the radar, and then it will expand to the voluntary markets. So I don't have an answer that how we can do it for now, because it is still, I would say, it is still evolving, and we do not have a framework where we can go and trade like based on voluntary mechanism. The detailed mechanism is laid down, but the methodology is yet to come into place. That's not the current scenario.
How to know what is the emission target of an entity?
So the emission target of the entity, so as I mentioned before, in July 2024, India came out with the compliance mechanism. So they have detailed a mechanism as to how they will like how they will achieve or how they will roll out this scheme. So that's what they have come out with, right? Now, these emission targets, what are being mentioned about the obligated entities, they will be specified only for now by the regulators only. So we cannot set those emission targets for now. They will be done by the regulators. It's in the compliance mechanism, actually. In case of a voluntary mechanism, it will be done by based on the project, and we have to come out like any non-obligated entity will come out with those targets, and then they will be verified by the accredited agency. That's how it will happen.
Can you suggest which organization or institution offers courses on GHG certification?
GHG certification, I am really not sure. Maybe if institute offers, I'm not sure if SRSB or institute offers such courses, but maybe you can connect with the institute if they're offering any such courses.
How long can an organization hold the credits?
So, interesting question, I would say. So, organizations can, for instance, in case of a compliance mechanism, when we were talking that there is a trajectory period of 6 years, organizations can hold the credit up to their project period. So they can hold that credit up to a period of 6 years in that case. And then they have to surrender, like once the project is completed, then they'll have to surrender those carbon credits.
Ma'am, we are done with the questions.
Okay. Okay, so I think that's all from my side also. And thank you so much, Priyal, for moderating this. Priyal and I think, yeah, thank you so much, Priyal, for moderating this. And thank you, SRSB team. And thanks to the audience for patiently listening and putting such relevant questions. It was great interacting with all of you.
Okay. Ma'am, I'll give the vote of thanks now.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Sustainability Reporting Standard Board of I extend my sincere gratitude to each of you for joining us today for the enlightening webinar on green credits and carbon markets in India. Your participation has been instrumental in making today's session a success. A heartfelt thanks to our esteemed speaker, CA Gauri Methi, for sharing her deep expertise and practical perspectives on green credits and carbon markets in India. Her presentation has enhanced our understanding of not only the functioning of green credits and the methods to acquire them, as well as the GCP program, but also the challenges and opportunities linked to it. It has enriched our knowledge about the evolving green credits and carbon trading landscapes in India. The discussion this afternoon indicated that these initiatives are not just technical instruments, but also represent India's ambition to balance growth with sustainability and to lead from the front in the global climate transition. The future has both promises and challenges, whether it's carbon sequestration, eco storage, or increasing inclusive and trustworthy markets. The impact we achieve will depend on how we all work together. Together, we can make India cleaner, greener, and more climate resilient. We invite all the participants to join us for our upcoming webinar scheduled for Thursday from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m., where we will continue exploring critical topics in sustainability reporting and best practices. Once again, thank you for your active engagement and thoughtful contributions. Your dedication to advancing sustainability practices is invaluable, and we look forward to your continued involvement in our ongoing initiatives as we collectively pave the way towards a more sustainable and resilient future. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Please go offline. Tech support. Hello? Go offline. Yes, and